The ad in the Cripple Creek Courier was peculiar, to say the least. Tucked between a notice for a lost chihuahua and an advertisement for discount dentures, it read, "Night Guard Wanted. Remote location. Must be comfortable with solitude. Strict protocol. Excellent pay. Inquire within. Ask for Silas." The address led me to a dusty antique shop on the edge of town, a place crammed with chipped porcelain dolls, moth-eaten taxidermy, and the general air of forgotten things. It was the kind of place you'd expect to find a cursed monkey's paw, not a job opportunity. My life in Colorado had become a series of dead ends. After losing my job at the mine, a cave-in, thankfully not one I was in, but enough to spook the owners into shutting down operations, I was running on fumes and the rapidly dwindling kindness of my landlord. Solitude sounded a lot better than eviction. A bell above the door jingled as I entered, the sound oddly mournful. The air inside was thick with the scent of dust and old paper. A man emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a stained apron. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it. He looked like he belonged in one of the antique photographs lining the walls. "You're here about the ad?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," I replied, trying to project an air of confidence I didn't feel. "I'm Liam." "Silas," he said, extending a hand. His grip was surprisingly strong, his skin cold and dry. "The job is unconventional." Unconventional was an understatement. Silas explained, in a slow, deliberate drawl, that the position involved guarding a telephone booth. Not just any telephone booth, mind you, but a specific one, located miles outside of town, on a deserted stretch of highway known locally as Whisper Pass. My eyebrows shot up. Guarding a phone booth? From what? Silas's lips curled into something that might have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. From interference, vandalism, unwanted visitors. The pay, as the ad promised, was excellent. Ridiculously so. Enough to cover my back rent and then some. Enough to make me ignore the growing knot of unease in my stomach. "There are rules," Silas continued, pulling a small, leather-bound notebook from beneath the counter. "Strict rules. You must follow them precisely. Your safety and other things depend on it." He opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with cramped handwritten script. The ink was a faded, almost purple-black. "Whisper Pass telephone booth. Night Guard protocol. Rule 1. Your shift begins at precisely 11 p.m. and ends at 5 a.m. Do not arrive early. Do not leave late. Rule 2. The booth will be stocked with supplies, a thermos of coffee, a flashlight, a radio tuned to static only, and this notebook. Do not bring any personal items. Rule 3. Remain inside the booth at all times. Do not open the door for anyone or anything. 3. If the phone rings, do not answer it. B. If the phone rings more than 3 times in 1 hour, note it down. Rule 4. If you hear knocking on the glass, do not acknowledge it. D. If the knocking persists for more than a minute, put on the headphones provided. Rule 5. If you see anything unusual outside the booth, do not react. Do not make eye contact. 11th. Document the occurrence in great detail. I stared at the notebook, a chill prickling my skin. Do not answer the phone. Do not make eye contact. It sounded like the setup for a bad horror movie. "What kind of unusual things?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. Silas's gaze was unwavering. "You'll know them when you see them. Just follow the rules, Liam, and you'll be fine." He handed me the notebook and a heavy, old-fashioned key. "The booth is unlocked with this. Be there tonight, 11 p.m. sharp." As I walked out of the antique shop, the bell jingling mockingly behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a deal with something far more unsettling than a gaunt man in a dusty shop. The Colorado wind, usually a comforting whisper, now seemed to carry a warning. The key felt heavy and cold. The drive to Whisper Pass was nerve-wracking. The highway, a ribbon of cracked asphalt, snaked through increasingly desolate terrain. The mountains loomed on either side, their peaks shrouded in a swirling mist that the headlights couldn't penetrate. My old truck rattled and groaned, the sound amplified by the oppressive silence. The only radio station I could pick up was a crackle of static, a constant, unsettling hiss that mirrored the growing unease in my gut. I found the telephone booth exactly where Silas had described it. A solitary sentinel of glass and metal standing beside a faded mile marker. It looked utterly out of place, a relic of a bygone era stranded in the middle of nowhere. The red paint was peeling, and one of the glass panels was cracked, a spider web of fractures radiating from a central point. It looked less like a communication device and more like a cage. I parked the truck a few feet away, the headlights illuminating the booth in a stark, almost accusatory glare. The silence, once I turned off the engine, was absolute. No crickets, no wind, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. 10:58 p.m. I took a deep breath, the cold mountain air stinging my lungs, and grabbed the notebook and the key. The metal was cold and heavy in my hand, a tangible link to the bizarre task ahead. I unlocked the booth, the mechanism stiff and rusty. The door creaked open with a protesting groan, releasing a faint odor of dust and ozone. Inside, as promised, were the supplies. A thermos of coffee that smelled surprisingly strong and fresh, a heavy-duty flashlight, a small radio emitting a constant stream of static, and a pair of heavy-duty headphones. The notebook lay open on the small, fold-down seat, the rules staring up at me. I stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind me. The click of the latch echoed loudly in the confined space. I was immediately struck by a feeling of claustrophobia, a sense of being trapped. The glass walls meant to provide a view now felt like barriers, separating me from something. I sat down, the seat cold and uncomfortable beneath me. I poured a cup of coffee, the steam momentarily obscuring the view. The coffee was surprisingly good, a rich, dark roast that sent a jolt of warmth through me. The first hour passed slowly, agonizingly so. The silence was the worst part. It pressed in on me, a physical presence. I kept glancing at the phone, a black rotary dial model that looked ancient. It remained silent, thankfully. Then, at precisely 12:17 a.m., according to my cheap wristwatch, the phone rang. My heart leaped into my throat. The sound was jarring, a shrill, insistent brring that shattered the silence. I stared at it, my hand frozen halfway to the thermos. Do not answer it. The rule echoed in my mind, a desperate mantra. The phone rang again, and again, 3 times. Then silence. My hands were shaking as I reached for the notebook, my pen scratching against the paper as I recorded the time and the number of rings. 12:17 a.m. 3 rings. The act of writing, of documenting the event, somehow made it feel slightly less terrifying. I took another sip of coffee, trying to calm my racing pulse. The static from the radio seemed to have increased in intensity, a swirling vortex of white noise that filled the booth. Then, I saw it. A flicker of movement outside, in the periphery of my vision. I forced myself not to turn my head, not to look directly at it. Do not react. Do not make eye contact. But I could see it in the reflection on the glass, a distorted, shadowy figure, tall and thin, moving with an unnatural, gliding motion. It seemed to be circling the booth. My breath hitched in my throat. I could feel the blood draining from my face, The figure was indistinct, blurry, but I could sense its presence. A cold, heavy weight pressing against the glass. Then I heard it. A faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. If the knocking persist for more than a minute, put on the headphones provided. I should put it now, I thought. The tapping continued. A rhythmic, insistent tap, tap, tap that drilled into my skull. Each tap was like a tiny hammer blow against my sanity. My hand hovered over the headphones, the plastic cold and uninviting. I hesitated. The rule said to wait a minute, but every instinct screamed at me to block out the sound now. The shadowy figure was still circling, its movements becoming more erratic, more agitated. I could see it more clearly now, reflected in multiple panes of glass, a fragmented, distorted image that made my stomach churn. It was tall, impossibly so, and its limbs seemed too long, too thin, bending at unnatural angles. I couldn't make out any features, just a dark, shifting silhouette. The tapping grew louder, faster. It was no longer just fingernails. It sounded like something harder, sharper, scraping against the glass. I could see tiny scratches appearing on the surface, adding to the existing spiderweb of cracks. 50 seconds. 50 seconds since the tapping started. My internal clock was screaming. The minute felt like an eternity. The figure outside was getting closer, its shadow looming larger, pressing against the glass. I could feel a cold, clammy dread seeping into my bones. 60 seconds. I snatched the headphones and jammed them over my ears. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the knocking. The static from the radio, which I hadn't even realized I could still hear, was gone. All I could hear was the muffled sound of my own ragged breathing and the frantic thudding of my heart. But even through the headphones, I could feel the vibrations. The booth was shaking, subtly at first, then more violently. The knocking had become a pounding, a relentless assault on the fragile glass. I squeezed my eyes shut, my hands gripping the headphones as if they were a lifeline. I started humming, a tuneless, desperate melody that vibrated in my throat. I didn't know what I was humming. I just knew I had to make some kind of noise, anything to fill the void. Then, I heard a new sound, a voice. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the headphones. At first, it was just a whisper, a faint, sibilant murmur that I could barely make out. But it grew louder, clearer, coalescing into words. "Let us in." The voice was cold, devoid of any human emotion. It was a chorus of voices, layered on top of each other, whispering in unison. "We are hungry." My blood turned to ice. I ripped the headphones off, throwing them across the booth. They landed with a clatter, the silence that followed almost deafening. The pounding had stopped. The shaking had subsided. I slowly opened my eyes, my body trembling uncontrollably. The figure was gone. The booth was silent, still. I looked at the phone. It was ringing. I stared at it, paralyzed by fear. I knew I shouldn't answer it. The rules were clear, but the voice in the headphones, "Let us in. We are hungry." What if the phone was a way to appease them, to stop them from coming back? The ringing continued, each shrill blast a hammer blow against my resolve. My hand, acting on its own accord, reached for the receiver. The metallic smell from inside the phone was overwhelming. My hand trembled as I lifted the receiver. The plastic felt cold and clammy against my ear. The ringing stopped, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the faint hiss of static, a ghost of the radio's signal. I was about to hang up, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake, when I heard it. A voice, but not like the one in the headphones. This was different. It was a single voice, clear and distinct, but utterly devoid of warmth or inflection. It sounded like a recording, played at the wrong speed, slightly distorted and unnervingly flat. "You should not have answered," the voice said. I wanted to slam the phone down, to sever the connection, but I was frozen, trapped by a morbid curiosity and a growing sense of dread. Who is this?" I managed to stammer out, my voice shaking. "We are the ones who wait," the voice replied. "The ones who listen, the ones who hunger." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The metallic smell, which I'd noticed earlier, intensified, filling the booth with a coppery, almost bloody scent. What do you want?" I asked, the question a desperate plea. "You have broken the rules," the voice said. "You have opened the door." A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the edge of the small, fold-down seat, trying to steady myself. The booth felt like it was spinning, the distorted reflections in the glass swirling around me. Then, I saw it. In the reflection, behind me, something was moving. It wasn't the shadowy figure from before. This was something else. Something inside the booth. I slowly turned my head, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing behind me, in the cramped space of the telephone booth, was a figure. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were wrong. Its skin was a pale, almost translucent white, stretched taut over sharp, angular bones. Its eyes were black, completely devoid of pupils or whites, just empty sockets that seemed to absorb the light. Its mouth was a thin, lipless gash that stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. It was smiling. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was constricted, my vocal cords paralyzed by terror. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, tipped with claws that glinted in the dim light. It touched my shoulder, and a jolt of ice-cold energy shot through me. "You belong to us now," the voice on the phone whispered, the sound seeming to emanate from the figure itself. The words were distorted, mixing into it a very human-like scream. The figure leaned closer, its face inches from mine. I could smell its breath, a foul, metallic stench that made my stomach heave. Its empty eyes stared into mine, and I felt a terrifying sense of emptiness, like my soul was being drained away. The last thing I saw, before darkness consumed me, was the figure's smile widening, its mouth opening impossibly wide, revealing a black, gaping void where its throat should have been. The phone slipped from my grasp and hit the floor. The receiver was still alive, the voice still whispering through. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pale pink and orange, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape of Whisper Pass. The wind, which had been eerily absent the night before, now whistled through the cracks in the telephone booth, a mournful, keening sound. Inside the booth, the scene was one of chaos. The thermos lay on its side, its contents spilled across the floor, a dark stain spreading across the cracked linoleum. The flashlight was smashed, its lens shattered. The headphones were tangled in a heap, the cord ripped and frayed. The notebook lay open, the last entry a frantic scrawl, 12:17 a.m. 3 rings. The telephone receiver lay on the floor, dangling by its cord. A faint, static-like hiss emanated from it, a constant, unsettling whisper. Outside, a beat-up pickup truck, much newer than Liam's, pulled up beside the booth. A woman emerged, her face etched with concern and a hint of weariness. She was dressed in practical work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, and heavy boots. Her name was Sarah, and she was Silas's niece. She'd been tasked with checking on the new night guard, a task she'd performed many times before, with varying degrees of success. Sarah approached the booth cautiously, her hand resting on the worn leather holster at her hip, which held not a gun, but a heavy, intricately carved wooden baton. She'd learned, over the years, that conventional weapons were useless against the things that haunted Whisper Pass. She peered through the grimy glass, her breath fogging the surface. She saw the mess inside, the spilled coffee, the broken flashlight. But she didn't see Liam. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. This wasn't unusual. Night guards at the Whisper Pass booth tended to disappear. Some ran, fleeing in terror in the middle of the night. Others, well, others weren't so lucky. Sarah tried the door. It was unlocked. She pushed it open, the creaking sound echoing in the morning stillness. The metallic smell, faint but unmistakable, wafted out, making her wrinkle her nose. She stepped inside, her boots crunching on broken glass. She scanned the booth, her eyes taking in every detail. The spilled coffee, the broken flashlight, the ripped headphones, the phone receiver still whispering. She carefully picked up the receiver, her fingers avoiding contact with the mouthpiece. She held it to her ear, listening. The static was louder now, punctuated by faint, distorted whispers. She could almost make out words, but they were jumbled, nonsensical. It sounded like pleading and screaming. Sarah quickly hung up the phone, the silence that followed almost a relief. She knew better than to listen for too long. The whispers had a way of getting inside your head. She picked up the notebook, flipping through the pages. She saw Liam's entries, his increasingly frantic handwriting, culminating in the final desperate scrawl. 12:17 a.m. 3 rings. Sarah sighed. Another one gone. She closed the notebook, a sense of grim resignation settling over her. She knew she should report this to Silas, but she hesitated. She'd grown tired of the endless cycle of disappearances, of the cryptic rules and the unsettling truth that lay beneath them. She looked out at the desolate landscape, at the mountains shrouded in mist. Whisper Pass held a secret, a dark and terrifying secret that Silas guarded jealously. And she was starting to think it was time to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. She looked at the phone and back at the road, then up at the sky. She was sure of one thing. She was not going to call Silas. Sarah drove back to town, the image of the empty, chaotic phone booth seared into her mind. Instead of heading to the antique shop, however, she went to her small, cluttered apartment above the town's only bakery. The scent of fresh bread, usually comforting, did little to ease the knot of unease in her stomach. She made a pot of strong coffee, needing something to cut through the lingering chill of Whisper Pass. As the coffee brewed, she pulled out a box from under her bed. It was filled with old notebooks, newspaper clippings, and faded photographs, the accumulated evidence of her growing suspicion about Silas and the telephone booth. Sarah had grown up in Cripple Creek, hearing stories about Whisper Pass. Local legends spoke of strange lights, unexplained disappearances, and the lingering sense of dread that clung to the area like the morning mist. Most people dismissed them as folklore, but Sarah had always felt a deeper, unsettling truth behind the stories. Her uncle Silas had always been a strange, secretive man. He'd inherited the antique shop from his father, and with it, seemingly, the responsibility for the telephone booth. He never spoke about it openly, only referring to it in vague terms, emphasizing the strict protocol that had to be followed. The disappearances had started years ago, long before Sarah was even born. They were sporadic, unpredictable, but always connected to the telephone booth. The local sheriff, a weary, cynical man named Brody, had investigated, but he'd always hit a dead end. Silas had always been cooperative, providing the same vague explanations, the same insistence on the rules. Eventually, Brody had given up, chalking it up to runaway drifters and the dangers of the wilderness. But Sarah knew better. She'd seen the fear in Silas's eyes, The way he avoided talking about the booth. The way he always seemed to be, listening for something. She opened one of the notebooks, flipping through pages filled with her own observations, her own attempts to decipher the rules. She'd noticed patterns, correlations between the dates of the disappearances and lunar cycles, weather patterns, even the types of items found in the antique shop. One particular clipping caught her eye. It was an old newspaper article, dating back to the 1950s, about the construction of the telephone booth on Whisper Pass. The article mentioned a local eccentric, a man named Elias Thorne, who had insisted on the booth being built at that specific location, claiming it was a point of convergence, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. Elias Thorne. The name resonated with Sarah. She'd seen it before, in Silas's old family records. Elias Thorne was Silas's grandfather. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the connection she'd been looking for. The telephone booth wasn't just a random object. It was deliberately placed there, for a specific purpose. And Silas knew what that purpose was. She looked at a photograph she'd taken of the rules notebook. The strange symbols, the mix of numbers and letters. It wasn't random. It was a code, and she was determined to break it. She was sure the telephone booth wasn't for communication between two humans. Sarah spread the photographs of the rules notebook across her kitchen table, the harsh fluorescent light illuminating the strange symbols and cryptic instructions. She'd spent hours poring over them, trying different ciphers, different combinations, but nothing seemed to work. It was a frustrating, seemingly impenetrable jumble. She took a sip of her now cold coffee, her eyes tracing the lines of text. She focused on the seemingly random mix of numbers, Roman numerals, letters, and Greek symbols. It wasn't a standard code. It was something else. Something older, more esoteric. Then it hit her. The symbols weren't meant to be read individually. They were meant to be read together. They weren't letters or numbers. They were coordinates. She remembered a conversation she'd had with Silas years ago, when she was a child. He'd been talking about old maps, about how cartographers used to use a combination of symbols and numbers to mark specific locations, hidden places, points of power. Sarah grabbed a map of the area, a detailed topographical map she'd bought from the local ranger station. She spread it out beside the photographs, her heart pounding with anticipation. She started with the first rule. 1. Your shift begins at precisely 11 p.m. and ends at 5 a.m. Do not arrive early. Do not leave late. This wasn't a coordinate, but a time frame, a window. The next rule. 2. The booth will be stocked with supplies. A thermos of coffee, a flashlight, a radio, tuned to static only, and this notebook. Do not bring any personal items. Again, not a coordinate, but a list of tools. Then came the symbols. 3. If the phone rings, do not answer it. B. If the phone rings more than 3 times in 1 hour, note it down. She looked at the Roman numeral 3 and the letter B. On the map, she located the area around Whisper Pass. She used a ruler and protractor, her hands trembling slightly. 3 could represent 3 degrees, and B could represent a bearing, a direction. She carefully plotted the point on the map. It landed on a small, unmarked peak, just north of the telephone booth. She continued, deciphering the remaining symbols, each one corresponding to a specific point on the map. The symbols weren't random. They were a series of coordinates, forming a pattern. The coordinates didn't just mark random locations. They formed a shape, a circle, and at the center of that circle, precisely where the telephone booth was located, was a small black dot on the map, labeled with a single word: anomalous zone. The anomalous zone. The words resonated with the newspaper clipping about Elias Thorne. the point of convergence. The telephone booth wasn't a communication device. It was a containment device, a barrier, something to keep something in or something out. The rules weren't instructions for a night guard. They were a ritual designed to maintain the barrier, to prevent something from breaking through. And Liam, by answering the phone, had broken the ritual. He had opened the door. The whispers on the phone suddenly seemed to be coming from all directions. Sarah stormed into the antique shop, the bell above the door jangling furiously. Silas was behind the counter, polishing a tarnished silver locket. He looked up, his eyes widening slightly as he saw the expression on her face. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling with anger and fear. Silas didn't pretend to misunderstand. He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "He's gone, Sarah. You know that." "Gone where?" she snapped. "What is that phone booth, Silas? What have you been hiding?" Silas set the locket down, his gaze meeting hers. There was a flicker of sadness in his eyes, a weariness that went beyond his years. "It's a burden, Sarah," he said, his voice low. "A family legacy. A responsibility passed down from my grandfather, Elias." He told her everything. About Elias Thorne's obsession with the anomalous zone, about his belief that Whisper Pass was a gateway to another dimension, a place where things could cross over. About the telephone booth, built as a focal point, a way to contain the energy, to prevent the veil from tearing. The rules, he explained, were a ritual, a carefully crafted sequence of actions designed to maintain the barrier. The black salt, the counterclockwise movements, the humming, even the static on the radio. They were all part of it, creating a harmonic resonance that kept the door closed. "And Liam?" Sarah asked, her voice choked with emotion. "He broke the ritual," Silas said, his voice flat. "He answered the phone. He let them in." "Them?" Sarah whispered, the word a terrified breath. Silas nodded. "The ones who wait, the ones who hunger. They've been trying to get through for years. Now, they have a foothold." Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She thought of the shadowy figure, the voice in the headphones, the empty eyes of the creature in the booth. She thought of Liam, his terrified scream echoing in the static. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Silas looked out the window, at the darkening sky. The wind was picking up, howling through the streets of Cripple Creek. "We wait," he said, his voice devoid of hope. "And we listen, and we hope it's not too late." Sarah left the antique shop, the bell jingling mockingly behind her. She walked out into the gathering storm, the wind whipping her hair around her face. The scent of dust and old paper was replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. She looked up at the sky, at the swirling clouds that seemed to press down on the town. She could hear it now, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind. A whisper, and then, in the distance, the shrill, insistent ringing of a telephone. It wasn't just one. It was dozens, hundreds maybe. All the phones everywhere ringing at once. A dark figure with black eyes was standing beside her. "You were warned," it whispered.